Okay, folks, this isn't really a news story, but I've seen a lot of talk today on the Twitter about a young lady named Rachel Corrie, who was killed by the Israelis. She's an American who was killed by the Israelis in Gaza way back in 2003. Over 20 years ago. It was March 16th, I believe, 2003. And there is obviously, with anyone who dies in Gaza, there is a callousness with which they are treated by not only Israelis, who obviously don't see them as human, but with American supporters of Israel as well. We see this reflected in the words of Alan Dershowitz, who has now completely renounced Barack Obama, because Barack Obama basically said that the people in Gaza have a right to exist, and that is way too extreme for Alan Dershowitz, who sees all people in Gaza as supporters of Hamas, because he says Hamas was elected, and so they won their election. Way back in 2006, they won like 44% of the vote or something. And I've gone over the statistics of how many people who were even legally able to vote in that election, how many of them are still alive. They make up like 12% of the population or something ridiculous. Maybe it was 25%. I'm probably being a little extreme saying only 12% of the population even got. Well, actually, no, maybe it was 12% would have actually voted for Hamas. But anyway, we know the position. The position of American Zionists and Israeli Zionists alike is that anyone who stands in the way of Israel's manifest destiny is subhuman trash to be disposed of. And so this American girl, Rachel Corrie, is counted among them. She was a literal human shield. People like to talk a lot about how, all these kids who die in Gaza, who die because they get crushed by rubble when their apartment building is leveled by an Israeli airstrike. Those kids are just human shields. Well, this girl, Rachel Corrie, was an unabashed human shield. She was standing in front of a bulldozer in Gaza that was tearing down houses, houses where people live. A house is not an easy thing to come by. You lose that, you're homeless. And homeless people, pretty vulnerable in society. They tend to move around a lot, and it's a lot easier to, let's say, ethnically cleanse an area if the people who live there no longer have homes. Then they kind of got nowhere to go except somewhere else where, they can find a home. And so this American girl, she was only 23, stood in front of the bulldozer with a megaphone and was shouting, some sort of protest against what was going on. And so they decided to just bulldoze her along with the house. And she got piled up in the rubble. Her body was never extracted, to my knowledge. I don't think they ever got her body back. Obviously, Israel's not going to give that back. If that's not the case, though, that would be interesting. Please, link to something in the comments, because I didn't see anything on a body being returned. That would be an interesting part of the story. But anyway, they killed her. She was mocked by not only Israelis, but Americans alike, who see her kind of like these, climate change wackos, who, stand in the street and shout about pie-in-the-sky nonsense that might affect somebody theoretically, 300 years from now. But in the meantime, they are obstructing ambulances. They are preventing people from getting to work. People who then might lose their job and then therefore not be able to provide for their family. In other words, the Antifa types, the ACABs, the climate change folks who like to block off major highways, they are hurting people. They're going into a public space, and they're preventing the public from using that space. They are obstructing people from going about their daily lives. Whereas this human shield, Miss Corrie, she was defending private property, which is not something that the far left communists are very fond of. They don't believe in private property. They think that the government should be able to do with property as the government sees fit. that the government should be able to take your house and redistribute it to other people. And so, in the view of the Israeli government, this property was better suited in the hands of Jews, and so they seized it from the Arabs who lived there. They razed their neighborhoods, and then they, for a time, I don't know about this in particular neighborhood, but there were Israeli settlements in Gaza to a limited extent. But anyway, they were replacing that population with Israeli Jews. And so this girl came all the way from America to a country where she did not speak the language to stand up for people who had done nothing wrong and whose homes were being seized unrightfully. This is a very basic value that certainly people on the right in America should be able to understand. Certainly it should be much easier to convince right-wingers that private property exists than left-wingers. Left-wingers, a lot, I mean, your average Democrat voter, of course, believes in private property, but I mean like left-wing activists, very common for them to poo-poo the idea of private property, but there's not a single right-winger who doesn't believe in private property, except when the person stealing your property is a Jew, because you see the Holocaust was bad, and so if a Jewish person says, well, I really think I deserve your house more because the Holocaust was bad, well, what are you going to say, that the Holocaust was good? That's the only response, apparently. And so, of course, if a Jewish person wants to steal your home and bulldoze it and build a new house on your property, you just have to say yes and go along with it, or else you're terrorist scum, and anyone who disagrees with that is terrorist scum. And remember, this is God's chosen people. These are the good guys who are going to go to heaven, so you got to stay on their best side. You got to stay on their good side, or else they're going to send you to the bad place with Muhammad. There are very few reasonable people on this issue. Viva Frei seems somewhat reasonable and open-minded. Even though he's reflexively a very pro-Israel guy, because who isn't reflexively in America and the West? Who's not reflexively pro-Israel? I think that if you, as far as your personal life goes, if you're in the West, more than likely you're more likely to meet and be close with someone who might be a dual citizen with Israel than someone who's, let's say, a Palestinian living abroad. And of course, Israelis are of European stock more often than not. I mean, yes, there are African Jews in Israel as well, but from what I understand, the large majority of the Jews in Israel are Ashkenazis. They're not even, Sephardi. Of course, that's because I believe the Sephardi were largely exterminated by the Spanish Inquisition. I don't know. I'm not the biggest history buff. Forgive me. So anyway, it's easier to relate to the Israeli side because those are people who we've had experiences with. If you're an American, odds are you've met, interacted with, and probably had friends who were Ashkenazi Jews. And so when you see those people over in Israel speaking English, saying we're the good guys and we're under attack from these Arabs who don't speak English, and those that do have a funny accent and they look like Saddam Hussein or Bin Laden, well, that's not they're not going to get a lot of sympathy from Americans who are just kind of flying by the seat of their pants. Honestly, this is the closest thing that I can think of to actual racism in American society. Not that people, I think, hate Palestinians because they're not white. It's just it's a bias thing. It's very hard to shake people of the pro-Israel bias, and it's very hard to get people to sort of take that first step of judging Palestinians as you would any other person. They're like Mormons. It's one of the few groups that it's still okay to hate in America. And so maybe calling it racism isn't the right thing, because, I mean, racially, you look at the Israelis and the Palestinians, oftentimes they don't look very different. So it's not a physical feature thing. But it's also not a religion thing, because, as we know, even though this is increasingly less so the case, historically, there are a lot of non-Muslim Palestinians, and there still are. Nevertheless, the Christian or other religious groups, whatever minorities amongst the Palestinian population, despite being equally persecuted by Israel and having just as much reason not to like Israel as the Muslims, they are still lumped in with the radical Islamic terrorists. I've mentioned former U.S. Congressman Justin Amash, whose parents were from Syria, I think, or something like that, and he has family in Gaza. He has been referred to, I've heard throughout my life, I've heard him referred to as Justin Hamas, despite the fact he's I think, Greek Orthodox Christian or something like that. Oh, he's just like Hamas, He's got that Hamas blood, even though, Hamas didn't even exist when his family, when his parents emigrated to the United States. And, considering it's also okay in America to hate white people and collectively punish them and blame them for, things that their ancestors did, you would think that maybe white people would have a little more sympathy for the Palestinians. Since oftentimes the Palestinians get blamed for the crimes of Adolf Hitler, of all people. I mean, how would you like it if BLM walked up to your house with a bulldozer and said, "We're tearing down your house because slavery was bad in the 1860s. And then after they bulldoze you, and crush you under the rubble, they throw a pancake party because they turned the white boys into pancakes." That's literally what the Israelis did to Rachel Corrie. They threw a pancake party. So anyway, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.